My name is Izzy, and I would like to welcome you all to the Harris Law Firm's webinar series, Wiser Together. Tonight's webinar, we're going to be discussing adoption of all kinds, and we are incredibly grateful that you are all able to attend. As a member of the Colorado community for over 25 years, the Harris Law Firm has always tried to give back. This and future webinars are a free service that we provide to that community. I would like to introduce our presenter today, Rich Harris. Rich is the managing partner of the Harris Law Firm, one of Colorado's largest divorce and family law firms. A passionate advocate who prioritizes personal attention, Mr. Harris has been named among the best lawyers in America, Colorado super lawyers, and a top lawyer of Colorado by the Denver Post. Outside of the courtroom, Rich has published articles across a range of family law topics, and he's also the co-author of the Colorado Family Law Desk Book. He's also actively involved in many international and domestic humanitarian organizations, including the Road to Hope, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting development in Haiti. Without further ado, Rich, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Izzy, for that very kind introduction. And thanks to all of you at home or wherever you might be for joining us tonight. I'm really glad you did. This is certainly one of my favorite topics to talk about, to think about, and certainly to practice in. And I commend you and I welcome you for your interest and for joining us tonight. We do have a fair amount to cover, and we want to leave some time at the end, as Izzy said, for Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with a bit of an overview. As this slide finally opens up, there we go. I'm trying a little new feature there. Forgive me. So I want to start with some opening thoughts about the process of adoption. As you may have seen from the promo, I have some personal family experience in this area in addition to my professional practice, and I'm happy to share a bit about that and about adoption in general. Then we'll talk about the different types of adoption that we have in the state of Colorado. And what we find in these cases is they're all slightly different, and they come to us in various ways, and people adopt through various situations. So this is by no means intended to be a complete overview of all the ways that folks do adopt, but we'll go through some of the major ones. And then we'll talk about some of the more specifics about the process. With that all being out there, we'll go ahead and move to the Q&A portion of the evening. And as he said, feel free to put those questions in the Q&A. I see we have a lot of folks on the call tonight, which is fantastic. We'd encourage you to keep your questions not personal, more of a general nature, so we can hopefully talk about things that apply to the broadest possible audience, if you will. Okay, so starting with an overview here. That's the wrong slide, but let me talk about just some initial thoughts. In our practice of family law, we handle, of course, lots of different kinds of cases, and the vast majority of the cases that we handle as attorneys at the Harris Law Firm and that the family law judges here are contested, difficult, often very bitter types of litigation. That's the reality of it. We work in that area. We enjoy helping people the best we can. The best part about adoption is that in the vast majority of these cases, we end up with a very happy result. It's a pleasure to practice in this area. It's even more of a pleasure to be a part of it in any way. And I know that judges feel the same way. In all the contested cases, judges are hearing day after day. While some of these adoptions cases can be contested, as we'll talk about tonight, the vast majority are not. And the result is essentially a real celebration. I've been blessed and fortunate to experience that moment personally and as part of a family my family on a number of occasions. I've had the privilege of adopting both internationally and domestically. I've seen quite a bit about both processes. And I will tell you that for anybody on this call, and I tell everybody this, if you're thinking about it, perhaps you're starting the process. It's not an easy process. Sometimes it's not an inexpensive process. But the end result just couldn't be better. It is such an incredible blessing in every way, not only for the child who is adopted. People often will say, well, you've done this great thing. And that hopefully that's true. You've made a difference in a child's life. But from a personal standpoint, I will tell you that the great joy and the great privilege is my own as a parent. And I know my wife feels the same way. We are the ones that are truly blessed to have our family expand in that way. So again, the process isn't easy. It's not simple. Sometimes it is indeed expensive, but if you work through it, you get to the end, the result could not be better. So now let's turn to some of the types of adoptions that we have. First of all, we have what's called kinship adoptions. Kinship, if you think about the general meaning of the word, it means a relative of the adoptee, the adopted child. People sometimes aren't aware of this, but a family member can adopt a child, and that happens for lots of different reasons. Sometimes the biological parent has passed away. Sometimes the biological parent is incarcerated. Sometimes the biological parent may have abandoned the child for a lot of different, typically tragic reasons. Sometimes the child becomes available for adoption because the biological parent's rights are terminated. In those circumstances, it is a mandate under Colorado law that the state should look first to a relative placement. In other words, can the child be placed temporarily or hopefully even permanently with some member of the family? And the member of the family can be almost anybody, provided they're an adult. Believe it or not, we have siblings that can adopt another sibling. We have grandparents, we have aunts, uncles, cousins, what have you. It's not a traditional, or I should say, it's not always a traditional older parent figure and much younger child. Adoptions happen in a variety of ways, and we have cases where somebody is adopting what used to be their sibling or what used to be another member of the family. This is called a kinship adoption. Next, obviously I'm having a challenging time with my slides tonight, forgive me. But again, it's an adoption by a family member. It's most often going to be a grandparent. We see aunts and uncles sometimes, but there are other family members, as I indicated. Okay. Next category, step-parent adoptions. Step-parent adoptions are situations where the child is the child of mom or dad, and that mom or dad gets remarried. When that parent gets remarried and the new parent and that parent decide they wish to adopt the first parent's child, there is a mechanism to do that. The biggest issue here, and this applies to several categories, is that one cannot adopt a child until the parental rights of a parent is being terminated, or in other words, the child is legally available for adoption. So how this pertains to a step-parent adoption is that the new parent, the step-parent, if you will, cannot adopt that child unless the former parent, in other words, the first parent's ex, has their parental rights terminated. That most often will occur through a voluntary situation where, for whatever reason, the ex-spouse of the parent seeking to adopt with their new spouse is agreeing to allow the step-parent adoption to go through. So again, you have one of the parents is the biological parent. That parent has a legal marriage to the new adopting parent. And again, in most situations, you then have the consent of the former parent or the ex-spouse of the first parent. Hopefully that's not too confusing. One other point I'd make on this subject is that Colorado law does recognize common law marriage. So common law marriage is a legal, valid marriage under Colorado law. So you can have a step-parent situation even where the new family, if you will, only exists under common law. There are complications with that. You're going to have some hurdles to jump over, which in a lot of cases, if we're representing folks in that situation, we're going to strongly recommend that they convert their common law marriage to a ceremonial marriage if the facts are appropriate, so that judges don't give you a hard time in you trying to prove the common law marriage. If you have any questions about that situation, or frankly, common law marriage in general, please reach out to us. We're happy to advise you on that subject. Next, you have custodial adoptions. So in a custodial adoption, you have a parent who has cared for a child for at least a full year, a calendar year. And this is often going to be a foster care parent, but there has to be a placement for a full year. Typically, I would say most typically, this is going to happen where there's been a case that's existing in the juvenile courts. There's a dependency and neglect action whereby the child is removed from the custody of whoever was caring for that child. That child is placed with another parent figure. Again, the courts are going to look first to somebody in the family, but if that's not a good placement, they're going to look for other opportunities through the foster care system. In either of those situations where there's been a placement for a full year and the courts have determined that it's not appropriate to send the child back to the biological parent or parents, you can have what's called a custodial adoption. By the time you reach that point, you're probably going to be working towards that and planning towards that for a number of months. And there's going to be proceedings already taking place to officially terminate the parental rights of the biological parents in order for the custodial adoption to go through. Going back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago, in every adoption, the child must be legally available to adopt, And the only way that can happen is if the biological parents are not alive, or they're not available, they're not around, and you've searched for them, the state's searched for them, or their parental rights have been terminated by the state of Colorado or another state. Next, we have what's called second parent adoptions. Second parent adoptions can fall into a couple of these other categories, but they're most often situations where you have a same-sex couple, which, by the way, may or may not be married. Same-sex partners can adopt. And it's a situation where you already have one legal parent, typically the biological parent, and then the second parent, again, is not legally available. They've passed away, they've abandoned the family, their parental rights have been terminated, or they're consenting to the termination. In those situations, we have what's called a second parent adoption. Another category we've seen, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, are families that come about through in vitro fertilization or another technological process where there really isn't a living other biological parent. You have families that are created through these kinds of frankly medical miracles, in my opinion. These are very good situations for second parent adoptions. And by the way, in case it's not obvious, the end result of any of these adoptions is a full legal parent who has the same exact rights as a biological parent once the adoption has gone through. And it's a complete adoption. In other words, there's a decree of adoption, a court order. It's as if that child was born to that parent as far as the law is concerned. So that new family is a legally recognized family. Should the couple break up or one pass away, all of the laws that apply to normal divorce or child custody situations or probate situations in the event of a death, those are all going to be handled as if the child was born from both parents. There is no legal distinction whatsoever. Next, this is a really, in my opinion, an amazing thing that happens. They're called adult adoptions. Did you know that it's not only children that can be adopted under Colorado law? Actually, anyone at any age can be legally adopted by another individual. When we talk about adult adoptions, it means exactly what it sounds like. You're adopting an adult, somebody who's 18 years of age or older. And so you might, if you have no familiarity with this, you've never heard of it, you might say, why would somebody ever do that? Well, the reality is that people become families. And in the world of adoption, we call them forever families. I love that term. People adopt for a lot of different reasons. For older individuals who have aged out of the foster care system, they have not been adopted through all the years that perhaps they've been available. It doesn't mean that longing for a forever family ever goes away. It doesn't mean that person doesn't still wish to have a place and a family they call home, a family to celebrate holidays with, a family to be a family. And so we've seen these incredibly amazing situations. I've seen them because I've seen them professionally, and I've also sat on the boards of adoption agencies. These are amazing situations where the adoptee and the new family become a new family, and it's not just a child adoption. The adoptee, like any other biological child, has the same rights. In other words, I mentioned a few minutes ago that the end result of an adoption is that the parents are parents legally for all intents and purposes. The same goes for the adoptee. That individual is treated under Colorado law, and actually federal law as well, as if they were born of that family. So they have the rights to inherit from the adoptive parents. There are benefits such as Social Security benefits and disability benefits that might be available. They're treated like the offspring, the biological offspring, if you will, of that family, just as if they were born. So adult adoptions are a thing, and a wonderful thing, in my humble opinion. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the mechanics about adoption. And what I'm about to share applies to almost all of these categories in almost every situation. There are nuances, there are some differences, but I'm going to talk about some common parts of the process for all the different types of adoption. First of all, you almost always have what's called a home study. The home study is a visit by a social worker, but it's a heck of a lot more actually than just a visit. It is a complete study of the home environment of the prospective family. It often involves interviews, background checks, in a lot of adoptions, including my own. When we've adopted internationally, we've had reference checks. We've had background checks, and actually we'll talk about the background checks a little more in a slide coming up. But all of these things happen, and then you have a home study. In a lot of situations, including oftentimes in our practice when we're helping people, we do some of the background checks and get the home study rolling very early in the process. So gosh forbid there's a problem, a legal barrier to the potential adoption. The sooner we find out, the better. The whole point of the home study is to confirm that, or to give a judge comfort, I should say, and to confirm that the future family is safe and healthy and appropriate. If you can imagine, they're going to look into anything they think is relevant. All the other individuals in the home, and that doesn't just mean the prospective parents. It means the future siblings, the children of the prospective parents, anybody else that's living there. It could be roommates, it could be other relatives. In our situation, at one point in my family, we had a caretaker who was helping us out for a few days a week while the kids were little. That's an individual that is going to be around the adoptee fairly often. There's a good chance that the social worker is going to want to meet him or her and find out about him or her to confirm, again, that you have a safe and appropriate home environment. And one thing that I tell people that often comes as a surprise, because it certainly did with my own family, is that you go through this really extensive kind of intrusive process. And in our situation, the reality is we had a wonderful, wonderful, amazing social worker who worked with us and later became a dear friend to our family. And most of the folks who do this kind of work are wonderful people. But the reality is you're under a microscope and it's a pretty intrusive, in-depth, kind of nerve-wracking process. The end result of that typically is that the social worker is going to draft up a pretty detailed written report, and you as the prospective parent are never going to read that report. It typically is filed under seal with the judge, and you don't ever find out the details unless there's a problem that's going to potentially either require more investigation and or that's going to be a legal barrier to the process. These would be big things that if you're thinking about adopting, it's my guess you know what they are. Anything that a reasonable person would think, okay, gee, this might not be a safe environment. There's an issue with somebody in the home. Those are things that could be a barrier to the adoption. The other thing that's going to happen in almost all cases is the adoptive parents are going to have to undergo background checks. Again, with the goal of confirming that there's no barriers to the adoption, that at the end of the day, it's in the adoptee's best interests to be adopted. So we're going to look at things like, for example, have there been reports, or worse yet, proven reports, founded reports of child abuse or neglect? Those things obviously are going to be a problem, as they should be. And in the state of Colorado, we have a specific procedure for this. They're called trails. Not quite sure what trails stands for, but it's a Colorado process that involves searching the records of all social services reports that might be out there. It's going to look at counties around the state of Colorado. It's going to also pick up if there's been issues in counties in other states and sometimes even other countries. There's a mechanism whereby this information is shared amongst departments of human services. System isn't perfect. There are mistakes. You might have seen some of those in the news over the years, sadly. But for the most part, this is a system that works very, very well. And we want to rule out, of course, that there's any history of abuse or neglect. Then you have two different agencies that in different situations also are going to run separate checks. The first one is through the state CBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. This is typically looking for Colorado criminal convictions, although law enforcement databases are getting better and better at sharing information amongst jurisdictions. It's going to pick up some other things as well, including charges, even dismissed charges. All of these things are going to show up most often in the CBI report. You also have an FBI report in a lot of cases. As you can imagine, the FBI's reporting is focused on federal crimes and charges and red flags, even internationally. If there are warrants out internationally, those are posted through a system called Interpol. Those will show up typically with the FBI background checks, and they're at least going to trigger further inquiry for sure. Anything like that comes up, there's going to be further inquiry. If something is out there and it's pretty bad, it's not necessarily going to stop the adoption, but in a lot of cases, it could. If it's a serious felony, certainly something that hasn't been reported in the application process through the home study, or if it's any crime involving any offense against a child or any offense of a sexual misconduct nature or offenses related to domestic violence in some situations, those are going to potentially be big problems, as most reasonable people agree they should be. So almost all adoptive parents have to deal with these background checks, just part of the process. Next, let me say a couple of other things about same-sex adoptions. Same-sex adoptions are available. They're legal. They've been legal in the state of Colorado for a number of years, and they're a lot more common than they were even 5 years ago. It's a significant portion of the adoptions that are occurring, and under Colorado law, they are completely legal. Part of the reason for this is the growing movement recognizing same-sex rights in our state, including the right to same-sex marriage, which has been legal in our state since 2014 and legal across the United States since 2015, based upon the Supreme Court case Obergefell. So same-sex marriage is recognized. Why do I bring it up here? I bring it up here because that growing impetus towards recognizing same-sex rights has increased access and certainly acceptability for same-sex adoptions as well. And this is a movement or a growth that we have seen for sure in the last 5 or 10 years. I will also add that when it comes to family law issues in general, not just with respect to adoption, our state, I'm proud to say, has very, very strong anti-discrimination laws. Anti-discrimination based on all sorts of classes, including gender. One of the things I talk about when I talk about child custody cases in our state is that the courts are not allowed to favor mother or father. Historically, it was mother in child custody cases. The gender is legally out, the consideration of gender, I should say, is legally outlawed. So is sexual orientation. And those laws are very clear. So there's no longer any question whatsoever in terms of same-sex couples' ability and right, frankly, to adopt, assuming all the other legal requirements are met. Let me say a few words next about international adoptions. The process is much different in international adoptions, and that's in general. So if you take all of the adoptions out there, I tell folks there's domestic adoptions, in other words, children that are available generally through the United States foster care system, the state foster care system, or adoptions that come internationally. Then when you get to the international adoptions, the requirements, the eligibility, the procedures, the costs, every piece of it is going to vary by country. And it changes over time. One of the things that most people have heard of and read about in the news, perhaps, is that China, for example, was an enormous part of all the adoptions coming to American parents for a number of years. That is no longer the case for a lot of reasons, and I could talk about that at length, and I have a lot of knowledge in that area. But China typically doesn't have as many international adoptions to the Western countries, and other countries have become more prominent. couple of countries in Central America, a couple of countries in Africa and Eastern Europe, and there are other areas, and those countries are going to change over time, but they vary. One of the things I tell folks when they're thinking about international adoption, or frankly, any adoption, is to be very, very careful about the professionals you're working with. Tragically, there's a lot of fraud in this area. There's a lot of unsavory individuals, and I can use much stronger words than that. You need to be very careful about whom you work with. And when it comes to international adoption, that is certainly the case. You need to make sure that you do your homework, ask for references, read online reviews, really make sure that you know what you're getting into, because there are really tragic stories out there. And an international adoption is typically very expensive and often time consuming. You're going to want to be very careful. Home studies are almost always required in these situations, but court hearings are typically not required in most international adoptions. One of the reasons for that is that the parental rights of the parent, the biological parent, in whatever country they're coming from, will be terminated before the children come home to the United States. And under federal law, at the first port of entry, when that typically plane lands at LA or New York or wherever they land in Denver, at that first port of call under US law, the children are automatically US citizens when they're coming from an international adoption. Typically, there's more paperwork that needs to be done. You're going to need to have a state of Colorado adoption, but those are sometimes granted without a hearing. And if there is a hearing, it's typically very quick and fairly informal. Okay. So what about these court hearings? And so what do you have to file? What's required? I'm going to just list these things to give you an idea without going into a lot of depth. But you have to file a petition, which sets forth to the court all the details about the process, the prospective parents, the child, the biological parents, whether or not the parent whose rights are being terminated or parents have consented. Hopefully they have. It creates a much easier process. If they have, you're going to file a consent to adoption right along with the initial filings. If they have not, you're going to need to file a motion to terminate the parental-child relationship. That is going to start typically a contested, difficult process. Hopefully you're not in one of those situations. If you are, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you, see if we can help. You have a document that talks about abandonment under Colorado law. One of the grounds for termination of parental rights is if a parent has failed to pay child support for at least a year and has failed to have any contact for at least a full calendar year. If one of those things have happened, you're going to want to have a filing that sets those facts out for the judge. You're going to have the home study in almost every case. There's some limited exceptions to that where you can ask the court to waive the home study. There's also a requirement under Colorado law that you file something explaining the fees that you've paid. And this is intended to prevent fraud. It's a good thing this is required because, again, there is fraud, sadly, in this area. And you're often going to file at the end of this, when you get to the end, report of adoption. That's the court decree, the final order granting the adoption. So I've mentioned a few times that there's going to be a hearing in most of these cases. I share with you an image of a happy family that I've never met, but I've been blessed to have pictures like this in my own family. The neatest thing ever, and you can see it's a happy proceeding. You get to the end of the process. It is not at all uncommon for the whole family to get together right on the bench with the judge and take a family photo. The hearing, if you've done your homework and the paperwork is filled out correctly, and it's a consensual adoption, not always the case, but if it's consensual, the hearing itself is going to be fairly quick. The parents are going to be there. The child that you're adopting is almost always going to be there. Sometimes if there's a consent, the relinquishing parent is going to be there, typically not in the same room with the adoptee child, but sometimes they're going to have to be there. And you want to make sure, again, that you get all of the paperwork correct, because there's different procedures, significantly different procedures, I'd say, whether it's contested or it's not contested. You want to make sure your paperwork is accurate, and you get to that final hearing. Hopefully the judge is going to ask some pretty basic questions, typically to confirm what's been filed in the petition and the other supporting documents, and to create a record, an official record, as to a finding that the adoption is in the child's best interests. All of that stuff is done, and hopefully you get to the end and you have this fabulous, happy picture. So then your adoption is complete. Couple things to think about, and then we'll move to Q&A. You're going to want to get a new birth certificate. Once you get the report of adoptions, the court order, you send it to the state agency, you pay a fee, and you'll get a new birth certificate. It says birth certificate via adoption or something like that. And in that birth certificate, it's going to list the new parents. If the child's name has been changed, which is definitely an option, the new name and the old name typically are going to be reflected on the new birth certificate. It's not a quick process. I'm happy to say it's quicker in Colorado than some other states, but it's not quick. It's going to take at least a few weeks. But when you get it, or actually when you make the request, you fill out a form typically, make sure you request at least 3 certified copies. Put them in the safe, keep them. You can order future copies, but you're going through this process anyway. Get at least 3 certified copies right from the beginning. It's not expensive and it's really helpful. Once the adoption is complete, there are many families that experience all sorts of challenges. Challenges with attachment issues, challenges with ethnic issues, especially if you have an adoption of a child from a different race or from a different country. I'd like folks to know there's a lot of great resources out there. I'm going to list them here on this slide, and this is by no means a complete list, but these are really good resources which have, among other things, resources for classes, for group therapy, for individual therapy, for social groups for adoptive kids. Raise the Future and CCAI. In particular, I would highlight only because I know them both well. They're great people. They do great work. They are incredibly experienced and ethical, and they are really reputable sources in our state. If you're adopting domestically, you're adopting through your local county Department of Human Services or Department of Social Services. They're often going to have some pretty robust services as well. Look into all of those, but reach out. The most important thing is you're not alone. It's nothing necessarily wrong with you that you've done wrong, or excuse me, or your child has done wrong. It's just not easy. And any parent can tell you, parenting in general obviously isn't easy. And adoption is no different. It's just that there are some unique challenges that can come with adoption, such as these attachment issues, which are often more profound the older the adoptive child is. But you're not alone. There's lots of great help out there. Please reach out and get that help. At the end of the day, it's a miraculous, amazing, fabulous process that results in a lot of cases with a lot of joy. And I commend anybody who's thinking about doing it, and don't do it just because there are kids out there that need to be saved. There are 300,000 kids alone plus in the United States foster care system. There's tons of need. There's tremendous need overseas as well. Do it because it's a good thing, but more importantly, do it because you will be blessed and you will be happier, and it's just a great thing. All right, I'm going to shut up for now. Let's turn it over to Izzy for some Q&A. Izzy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rich. Alrighty. Here is one. My husband and I will be same-sex parents. What are the limitations regarding adoption in Colorado? Oh, hold on, there's more. Including maybe not going to a religious agency.
Okay. Great question. I'll repeat all the questions. So the questioner is asking about a same-sex adoption, and maybe this question has already been covered in my remarks, but I'm happy to do it again. The good news is that legally there should not be any discrimination whatsoever. Same-sex parents have the same rights as hetero parents for sure. If you're using an agency, I recommend, well, for sure, do your homework about any agency in any situation, whether you're any kind of family. But for sure, in a situation like this, you want to make sure not only is there not should there not be any bias, whether overt or even implied. If you get a funny feeling or you get any kind of negative anything, you feel it, move on. There's plenty of agencies. Some agencies are going to be transparent about their faith-based focus, and there are conservative religious organizations that may not be a good fit for a same-sex adoption. But again, the good news is that under Colorado law, it's available. It's available whether or not you're married, and you should not hesitate. If you have an intact, loving, healthy relationship and you want to bring a child into your family, you should do it. That's my personal opinion. And it's the opinion of the law that you cannot be discriminated against.
All right, thank you. Do you have any recommendations for reputable adoption agencies that work outside of the foster system?
The question is reputable agencies that work outside of the foster care system. I think what the questioner means is international adoptions. And I would say definitely yes. There are a number of good ones. I would humbly suggest you start with CCAI. CCAI is a nonprofit based in Englewood, Colorado. I have no financial tie to them, no interest at all. I will just tell you that I know the folks who run it very well. I know their ethics. I know their experience, their background. They no longer focus exclusively on Chinese adoption. They adopt from countries all over the world. They even can help with domestic adoptions, and they have a great deal of expertise. If you're thinking about international adoption, my suggestion is contact at least 2 agencies, maybe 3 agencies. Do some research online. Most of these agencies will have a lot of information on their website, and then they often invite folks in for some sort of informational seminar. Go to those, get a feeling, talk to people, listen to references, find out about the options. The cost should all be very transparent. The process should be as transparent as possible, including, you might be told, look, and I'm just going to pick random countries. Taiwan may be a very easy place to adopt from right now, but the Ukraine may not be. And I'm just making up examples. You want to ask those questions. If the process is difficult, a good agency will tell you that. And they'll ask why you're looking at that area, and are you open to different areas? There are also different requirements by country. So, for example, some countries, and I should have said this in response to the prior question, some countries will not allow adoptions to same-sex couples. And a good agency will tell you that. Some agencies will tell, or some countries, I should say, aren't going to allow adoptions if you're a certain age, or if you're not married, or if you're not married for a certain number of years. I've gone beyond the question of how do you find an agency, but these are the kinds of questions you should not only ask, but feel comfortable about the answers that you're receiving. Izzy, perhaps one more question?
Absolutely. Can you adopt domestically without going through the fostering process?
Yes, the answer is yes. The question is, can you adopt domestically without going through the foster care process? So to put it in a little context, a lot of people adopt domestically by being foster parents first. I've known folks that are foster parents for a lot of years, and they're just wonderful people who want to help, and they never have any intention of adopting. In some of these cases, there are foster parents who go into the process with the idea that if the circumstances were right, maybe I'll adopt. There are also people who are in the foster care situation where the social workers approach them and then they say, look, you're just fostering. I say just, it's an incredible, miraculous thing that anybody would do. But they might say, the social worker might say, look, the parental rights are being terminated. Are you open to an adoption? But all of that aside, you don't have to go through the foster care system. You can adopt through county departments of social services. You can go right through the county. You can also use an agency like CCAI to work with a county, or to search through a number of counties in Colorado or in other states. But it is not a legal requirement under Colorado law that you must first foster the child. So with that, unfortunately, I need to pause. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions. Let me not only pause, but end by saying thank you. I'm thrilled that so many folks have joined us. If you're starting this journey, it's a magical, incredible journey, not an easy one, but I commend you for wanting to do it. I wish you luck. If we can help, we'd be delighted to do so. Just please reach out. And on that note, I'll turn you back over to Izzy, and I'll wish you peace and good night.
Thank you so much, Rich. And thank you all for attending our webinar this evening. As a thank you, we'd like to offer you a free consultation with one of our attorneys to get some more of those questions answered. I would also like to reiterate what Rich said, and that we wish you peace, and we hope to see you at another Wiser Together webinar. Have an excellent Wednesday, everybody. Good night.